I'm Jonathan Horn.
I'm Cody Atkinson.
And I'm Matteo Schlapek-Savillo, and this is the 110 Percenters podcast. On this week's show, we review a Showdown boilover, discuss a troubling Four Corners investigation into CTE and concussion, and shoot from the hip. Welcome to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. My name is Matteo Schlapek-Savillo. I write the 1 Percenters newsletter. I'm joined by Cody Atkinson of the ABC. Cody, how are you?
Cold and getting colder. How about you, Matteo?
Yeah, I'm not sure which of our cities is colder today, but it's safe to say it's not really a competition we want to win, is it? It's grey and wet here in Melbourne. A good day to be inside with the heating on, listening to your favourite footy podcast, I reckon.
And you guys aren't in the sauna this week, so that's a bit of a shame. Usually this is Australia's premier football podcast recorded in a sauna, but here you guys suffering outside.
Well, that's right. And Jonathan, that is Jonathan Horn of The Guardian, esteemed co-host. I don't know about you. I've actually got the heating. It's up fairly high, so it's not quite sauna, but it's maybe sauna adjacent here where I'm recording from. How's it where you are, Jonathan?
Yeah, I miss our little sauna type environment, Matteo. We'll be back there next week, I assume. We're just having a few renovations, I hear, to our little studio. But
that's right.
This is nonsense weather in Melbourne right now. Might move to far north Queensland or something like that and start writing about surf lifesaving or something because, it's rubbish in Melbourne at this time of year.
I've done a bit of a fact check. 15 degrees in Melbourne right now, 12 degrees in Canberra.
Yeah, we're pretty soft, mate. We're pretty soft.
Yeah, so you win, Cody. Congratulations. Maybe
I win frostbite. Congratulations.
Yeah. Maybe what we should do is move to Italy, where Cody, they apparently practice that sort of medieval form of soccer you were telling us about.
Yeah, Calcio Storico Florentino. Check it out on YouTube, people. Great 3:30 a.m. watch.
I think you nailed the accent as well. A small bit of housekeeping before we begin this week's show. We now have a proper logo. Cody, your placeholder did a great tour of duty. Its watch has now ended. Thank you very much to my friend Connor O'Brien for his great design work. Please do check out his work. And because we have a proper logo, we've also now set up proper social media accounts for the podcast. That's right. We've joined the rat race. It's going to be us and, Dan Does Footy. You can find us at 110 Percenters. That's Percenters with an A instead of an ER on Instagram and Twitter. The idea is that we're going to post clips from the show and, through the magic of the algorithm and the high quality of our insights, we're going to soon usurp the established footy media and become the most popular footy podcast in the land. How does that sound, guys?
Yeah, no pressure, mate.
Yeah, like small targets, but we'll get there.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, I hear clips, going viral with clips on Instagram can do wonders. So let's see what it will do for us.
And we will say that if you guys pay us to do a type of clip, we're willing to post it. There are boundaries, but enough cash.
Yeah, if what you're saying is that we sort of actually don't really have many scruples, yeah, I think you'd be right. Listeners, pitch us, please. You know where to go. Back to the actual footy. And to be honest, round 16 was a bit of a fizzer, actually, but that doesn't mean it was without intrigue. The Lions reminded everyone they're still here by beating the Swans by 7 goals at the Gabba on Thursday night. Hawthorn held off an injury-depleted but still fast-finishing GWS at the MCG on Friday night. On Saturday, Carlton and Collingwood fairly easily dispatched West Coast and Richmond. On Sunday, North Melbourne supporters, they were left wondering how they only beat Essendon by 14 points. And Fremantle flexed new muscles that we didn't even know they had by holding Gold Coast to just 3 goals in Perth. The Dockers have now won 14 games in a row. How exciting for them. But we begin this week's pod at the Adelaide Oval, where on Saturday night, Port ambushed the Crows in a standalone showdown. 26 points didn't do the game justice. A 10-goal margin would not have flattered Port. They were the better side all night. It was a really comprehensive display against a side that people had been talking up as a top 4 fancy. So we're going to discuss what this result means for Port, I guess, what it might say about Josh Carr and perhaps Zach Butters, and what it means for the Crows, who again failed on a big stage. Jonathan, we will get onto the Crows, oh will we? But before we do, let's talk about Port. We really should give them their flowers. This is a very impressive performance. I think for pretty much the whole season, analytics, have suggested that they're much better than your average 15th place team. Their percentage is over 100. Their defensive numbers are really good. They beat Geelong. They almost beat Sydney. It's a big green tick for Josh Carr in his first season. What was your impression of the game on Saturday night?
Well, yeah, firstly, the Port. I mean, they were really impressive, and it reminded me of one of those old school Ken Hinckley ambushes that he used to traffic in his time, where every couple of months you'd get this Port team that had just sort of been chugging along suddenly come out and they'd be foaming at the mouth and they'd punch the opposition on the jaw and away they go. It felt like that sort of game, and you could one of those, and obviously it was their home crowd and their home game, and they're wearing their 1914 replica jumper and everything that entails. And there was just this feeling of that they were the team that brought the energy, and that the Crows were just incredibly passive. There were so many moments in that game, especially early, where you're sort of saying to yourself, watching it, come on, fly the flag here. Push back a bit. But you're just sort of letting them roll right over you. And Horn Francis in particular, there was just so many little passages of play where he just barreled over about three guys in the one passage of play, and there wasn't a lot of resistance from the Crows. And in that respect, I think it very much reminded me of that semi-final against Hawthorn, the early stages of that game when Jai Newcomb, I think you're probably better placed than me to remember that game, Matteo. Sorry to bring it up. It's
no, I've tried to expunge it from memory, but that's fine.
Where Newcomb got had about 5 clearances in the opening 15 minutes, and the similar passage in that qualifying final against Collingwood as well in the third term, where there was sort of a hinge moment in the game where the intensity stepped up a bit, and that Crows midfield didn't really respond. And I guess that's the question mark that continues to hang over them.
Yep. Cody, please tell me if your read on this is really different. And of course, centre bounces and scores from centre bounce have been a bit of a topic of discussion in our sort of corner of footy Twitter in the last few days. But as we know, of course, most of the game kind of happens post-clearance and outside what happens in the middle. But obviously it is a reference point, what happens at that centre bounce or centre ball up, I suppose I should call it now. Something that I've noticed is there's this really interesting dynamic between these two sides, or certainly at least it played out this way on Saturday night, where maybe not to quite the same extent as in past seasons where Port would sometimes run with all of Butters, Horn Francis and Rosie in the middle, which was obviously sort of 3 attack first centre square midfielders. Now with Rosie's injury, it sort of allows them to go with more of a sweeper, more of a defensive type at the centre ball up. You've got a team that really wants to attack and create damage out the front of stoppage. And then the Crows, under Nathan Van Berlo as their midfield coach, I think they're set up to contain more, and that's usually kind of it's ultimately a function of personnel and intent, I guess. And so many times on Saturday night, I noticed that Crows defenders were either willingly or kind of without too much of a fight, taking the sort of back shoulder position at those centre ball ups and effectively kind of conceding that first possession, which, there have been times where teams have exploited that against Port, but it certainly didn't work on Saturday night because, when players like Horn Francis and Butters, when they can block for each other, when they can get first possession, that's when they can cause a lot of damage. And it felt like that really set the tone for what happened kind of downstream in the game.
Yeah, there's definitely been changes to how Adelaide have set up at the clearance. So it's both personnel and positioning. We're seeing a bit more Berry this year. And I think we're seeing a bit more eyes to how to escape that first layer. So on the weekend, Port were just so good from clearance. Horn Francis and Butters cut them up. But on the year, Adelaide haven't been really impressive when they've won the ball. So Berry and Dawson are near the bottom of the league at turning first possessions into clearances. So they'll get their hands on the ball. Berry's running at 66%. From memory, the league average is about 77. So at that point, you're really losing that advantage. And McAndrew has had a good year. So if you're not capitalising on hit-outs, you've got to play defensively. And I suspect that's what Nix has done. I'm not sure they've got the personnel to do that beyond Peatling. Peatling's great. I love a bit of Peatling. But him and Berry are running in rotation. I think they've got the most subs of any non-ruck in the league this year, on and off this year. So you don't usually see them running in the same midfield. But just on a couple of quick numbers, they've got I understand this year they've got the worst hit out to first possession rate, worst hit out to second worst hit out to first possession behind West Coast, worst hit out to clearance rate of any team in the league. Just well below the league average. And I think it leaves you really open to being exploited if teams prepare for that, if they prepare for the knowledge that even if that you win the ball, you can't do anything useful with it. And I think Port is just so heavily focused on clearance. It was almost a perfect matchup in that regard.
Yeah, and let's very quickly sort of go full circle and return to that awful, well, for me and other Crow supporters, semi-final and even the prelim final, the qualifying final, Jonathan. I think this is where, the absence of a player like Rankin, and Rankin was sort of nominally there on Saturday, but he, kind of copped that knock, I think, to his ankle early on, and then he was effectively a non-entity. He was actually the lowest rated player on the ground, which I'm not sure has happened before in his career. Teams sort of, especially if Dawson is playing more of that first receiver role rather than, or a ball winning role rather than a first receiver role, teams can set up reasonably confident that Adelaide aren't really going to damage them very much. And so their own setups can be a little bit more attacking that way and can sort of offset that reasonably good containability that Adelaide's midfield mostly has. Look, I said that we would give our flowers to Port before we talk about the Crows. We haven't done that. We sort of jumped straight into Crows chat somewhat. Too much.
I'm happy to give flowers to Port. I reckon. And same. I'm guessing you too, Jonathan. But I reckon it's been really impressive how Carr's come on, because everyone thought this would be a continuation of the Hinkley era. Was that your take when he took over, Jonathan?
Well, it was after I watched them against North Melbourne in round one, where they were absolutely wretched. That was they were just and they were blown away in stoppages at that game. And I watched that game thinking these guys are going to finish last, and especially, you could easily think at that stage that there was this long year ahead with Butters. Like, what are we going to do here? Like, is he just going to phone it in? He's got to get through 24 rounds of, being beaten every week and probably being tagged and the team being no good. So, but he's kind of done the opposite. I mean, he could easily have sort of just, chugged along, got 20, 25 touches a game and, left on good terms, does no harm to his asking price or his reputation. Instead, he's sort of playing like a man possessed at the moment. And he was incredible on what was it, Saturday night in that game. And like you say, like, just credit to the coach, because they've also had a lot of bad luck in games where it's sort of been toss of the coin games, including that first Showdown, which was a much better game and which was just one of the games of the year. And they really should have won that night.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's kind of they're one of those teams that you just don't want to play, because they absolutely dismantle Geelong, and have taken a lot of really good teams right to the wire. So I just think that a game like Saturday's was a long time coming, and I kind of also just like how Carr handles himself, like from afar. I'm not a reporting in the South Australian media or anything like that, so I don't really know him too intimately, but he's really honest about the team. If they play badly, he'll come and say, we were terrible at this, and this, and if they do well, and there's just a little bit of Hinkley there too. He really had him ginned up on Saturday night for that game, in a way that the Crows just conspicuously weren't.
I chatted to Cal Wilkie a few years ago, And Wilkie's a really interesting story. And for those who don't know, mature age draftee, overlooked in 3 or 4 drafts. And he credits his entire career to Josh Carr. Like, Carr is the one who put him down back. He was a forward swingman in his junior under 18 years, and he's sort of undersized. And Carr taught him, like, the value of a role and taught him the value of self-belief. And he was an accountant, and he was probably likely to be an accountant for his 20s playing sandful footy, and we wouldn't have a multiple-time All-Australian now if it wasn't for Josh Carr. And there's other stories like that. I think he's just a really good man motivator, but he's also got a really astute tactical mind. Sorry, Matteo, I think I cut you off there.
No, you didn't at all. I think, well, you could see evidence of that astute kind of tactical brain on show. I think on Saturday, we've kind of already discussed the stoppage setups and how Port just, so easily sort of gained the upper hand there. And there obviously is a story about Adelaide's passivity or maybe the inability of their coaches to sort of make those in-game adjustments. But I do think, a lot of the story is about Port. I was really, really impressed with, and again, Carr isn't the first coach to have done this, right? But the way that he used Vicentini to sort of like take Mark Keane out of sort of high-value intercepting zones. So Mark Keane, having been best on ground, basically, in his comeback game against Melbourne the previous Saturday, was again sort of a non-factor in this game. Everyone knows how important he is to Adelaide, both as an interceptor and then as a sort of rebounder. So often he wasn't able to impact contests as the third man up, or he wasn't able to sort of participate in back half chains because he'd just been sort of dragged away to other areas of the ground. I thought that was really, really, really impressive. Something that also I found really noticeable, as I suppose someone who was watching with a particular perspective, was just how well Port was able to anticipate the sort of shape and direction of Adelaide's handball, like exiting handball chains. And just a sort of this kind of supernatural, really, ability to anticipate when the Crows would kind of look to go inside by hand, or when they'd kind of try and opt for an overlap. That just seemed really clever and basically really well coached to me. I mean, it seemed like they knew, what Adelaide were going to do just as well as Adelaide's players did.
They did that in that final a couple of years ago against Hawthorn too. It just, there was a very similar feel to that game. The one with the Ginnivan aeroplane thing from Hinckley, that was a game that they weren't expected to win at all, and that just their intent and, like you say, their method very much reminded me of that night.
When I've seen them live a couple of times, and I'm pretty sure I've asked Ken this before, I'm pretty sure they work on that handball lane and handball exit stuff. I reckon they do more prep work and on that type of thing than most, or at least it seems like it from my angle. And it's in games like against the Crows. If you see an opponent twice a year, you get so familiar, especially where the coach is static. Nick's has been the gig for a while. So it's really interesting you picked that up, Matteo, because that's something I've picked up over the years too.
So across the last 10 games, Port are first for opposition scores per inside 50. They're second for opposition chain to score. They're second for pressure acts differential. They're third for opposition expected kick retention, favourite stat of 110% is Claxon. They're fourth for opposition forward half scores. They're second for opposition stoppage scores. They're very, very good at containing the opposition as well. And they're 17th for opposition expected score per shot. So it basically tells me that this is a defensive zone. So let's, post clearance, this is a defensive zone that's working in extremely good order. They are forcing difficult shots. They're making it really, really difficult for teams to transition effectively. And it's funny, if you actually look at the numbers, Saturday was one of the Crows' best games in terms of raw sort of D50 to forward 50 transition success rate. About 40% of the time when they started in D50, they'd end up in forward 50, but almost none of those chains ended up in scores because they were just funneled out to the boundary, or Port was able to execute, forward half turnovers. Port won the sort of forward half score origin battle by 35 points. So that's the margin plus a little bit extra right there, if you wanted to look at it that way. So again, I'm just really, really impressed by Carr's ability to have implemented a kind of defensive structure which went through many incarnations under Hinckley. We can kind of talk about the days in which they were a team which really lived in its own front half and were vulnerable to the opposition sort of slingshotting and getting up behind them. And then there was a slightly more balanced profile. But this is a team who defensively really, really stacks up. And Jonathan, you said that they've had some bad luck this season. Look, they have, if you look at the raw results. But I want to advance a bit of a devil's advocate take, which is, obviously every side wants to win, and losing a showdown by point isn't fun. Losing, I think it was by 3 points maybe to Sydney, that isn't fun either. But Port don't need to win this season. I think they needed to show evidence of growth. They needed to get minutes into young players. Jack Whitlock and Joe Berry, the 2024 draftees, I think are showing a lot. And, obviously it's kind of all eyes on Doggy Cochran this year. In terms of the draft, and then they've got this sort of clutch of father-son and NGA products in the coming years. So, look, they're still going to have a pretty fun time in terms of the draft period. But obviously, the question is Butters, and we've spoken about him as a sort of as an instigator, a fire starter. He was wonderful on Saturday night, such a well-deserved best on ground. But it's almost certainly going to be his last showdown. He of course, has been sort of very, he's played with very straight bat, all of the questions about his future, but inevitably that sort of means that it's much more unlikely that he'll continue on at Port this season. And that really does change things, doesn't it, Jonathan? I mean, the idea of a Port Adelaide without Zach Butters will take some getting used to.
Yeah, and it's a shame we're not going to see that partnership with Horn Francis sort of reach maturation, really. Because they just demolished the Crows on the weekend, so they're going to be playing against one another next year. Someone told me this week you've got to stop talking about the Ablets. Well, talking to me, not you guys, but you got to stop talking about the Ablets on this podcast. It's too much. You got to let it go. People aren't interested, which is fair enough. But I will say
that means we have to strike the Jeff Ablett segment later. We can't talk about Luke Ablett down the road. How about the Tucks? Do the Tucks count?
No, but he is watching him in a game like that reminded me of Gary Jr. in full flight. I thought just the way he moves, even the way the body composition, the way he sort of cuts and swerves, a lot of Gary Jr. in Butters, and whoever gets him, whether it's, who would be the favourites? Probably the Dogs at this. Who knows really? But I kind of hope he goes to Richmond because I'm not sure the Bulldogs need him. I'm not sure he's exactly the sort of player that the Bulldogs need, but, it's fair to say whoever gets him is just getting an absolute jet.
Cody, interested in your take. I've heard. Oh yeah. I've heard the argument that the sort of the marginal value he'd add to a side like the Dogs, would maybe be sort of more efficiently allocated at another club. But interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. I guess it's how long Treloar and Libba have left, right? Because they may have spots open up in the midfield, and whether Fraser and Sanders are going to hang longer term. Sanders is Tasmanian. Tassie's apparently got $5 million extra to lure players over with as signing bonuses. So they could be looking at their medium to long-term list profile and maybe less Bont in the midfield. I don't know. I agree. It seems like the less neat fit. Richmond have 1,004,000 midfielders, young midfielders that they've drafted that they're going to have to shoehorn in. And they're going to have to pay them at some point. I think Richmond are trying to be ambitious, and I imagine they'd front load almost all of that money. So be playing for very cheap later on, which has risk in the Zach Merritt sense. And it was Geelong was the other one. Geelong really do so many interesting tricks to make their lack of midfield seem like a real midfield, and they're very good at it. Like, they get their inside midfielders to post-contest to play like outside midfielders and vice versa. They get one of their wings to essentially play as a forward to open up one side of the ground, and they get one of their ruckmen sometimes to play as a wing. It's so fascinating what they do. If they had a real midfielder for the first time since Selwood or Dangerfield, I just don't think the competition could handle it. Can I have 1 more minute? Sorry, 130 seconds.
Yeah, of course you can continue your sidebar. I'm finding it very interesting.
I think it's a bit weird that we're still talking that it's a 3-horse race, right? This is being drummed up by agents or potentially clubs, but I would say agents to drive up his market, to drive up his asking price. He's a restricted free agent, and as far as we know, he hasn't made a decision. I think it's like reading Women's Day sometimes. Like we're hearing this speculation of these Hollywood stars where they've had ferrets visit them recently, and I think it's a bit much sometimes, and it takes away from the joy of the game because Butter's had such a bloody good game on the weekend, and he's having such a good year that it sort of removes a bit of the fun out of it. And maybe it's from people that just don't love the game that much that we're willing. And I know I've just talked about his fit at different clubs, but I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You're absolutely
Jonathan,
right.
you were chafing to speak there for a second.
Oh yeah, go on, Jonathan.
Big fan of the journalism in Women's Day. I read worse in more esteemed publications these days, to be honest, Cody.
I was going to say, is that one that you contribute to under a pseudonym too? Or?
I once went for a job in England for in my very, very, very early days. I once went for a job with a photocopying magazine, and I did
a photocopying, like a magazine. Correct. About
Photocopiers Monthly.
I was 20.
Xerox Digest.
Correct. It was something like that. I was 20 and keen for work. And so I toddled up one of my first ever job interviews and didn't get the job. Let's just say that probably the golden age of magazines back then. So I hope they're doing well there. I've moved on. I hope they have as well.
Yeah, look, I don't know about Photocopiers Digest. I read Big Copying Machines Monthly personally, but it's
screw you.
Yeah.
Let's give Zach maybe some more flowers, and this time, we'll do it without kind of hypothesizing where I might be playing his footy this year. A stat courtesy of friend of the show, Emlyn Brees, who's basically in the latest edition of This Week in Football, crunched some numbers about what he calls total equity share. So basically, what players contribute to their team in terms of winning the ball and then using the ball. And according to Emlyn, Zach Butters this year has the highest recorded total equity share of any player. He's on track to be the first player to contribute more than 10% of their team's total equity. He's currently at 10.3%. I suspect that wouldn't have gone down very much after Saturday night's game. So it's both. I mean, but this is the dilemma, I suppose. It's awesome that he's playing this kind of footy, and it's sad, certainly for Port fans, that I guess he may be doing it elsewhere this year. But guys, maybe let's cap this conversation by just going back to the Crows and talking about, I guess, familiar failings. It felt like, yet again, it feels like, certainly in my circle of sort of hardcore Crows supporters, there were so many of the same laments after Saturday night's game. A conservative coaching group, or perhaps one that was unable to change things in game. And I think a lot of the time, a coaching group's ability to change things in game can be a bit overstated. Slightly, not a very dangerous midfield, and certainly one that is outmatched by the very best, and that teams can set up against. I mean, perhaps there's a question sort of, directed at both of you. Does this sort of change your views on what Adelaide can accomplish this year?
Personally, I think that they're a team that's been on this emotional high since the tragedy with Jordan Dawson's family. They've been on that emotional high for a number of weeks, and I think that there was an inevitable lull coming. I didn't think it would happen in a game like a Showdown. But you two are a lot smarter at me with data and things like that, and I'm very much an eye test sort of guy. And to me, they always look like a team that's, whenever the ball's in the air, that they look like a magnificent team. Whenever the ball's, and I'm totally simplifying and generalising here, but
no, this is great.
Whenever the ball's on the ground, that they struggle. And that night when they were playing indoors against the Western Bulldogs, where they just tore them apart, that was a perfect night for them. And they actually have a really good record in games like that at the Docklands under the roof. Whereas, a bit of a wet night, the ball scrubbing around a bit more, that they do struggle in that scenario. And that was something I think that Sam Mitchell talked about even in the when he spoke after that final last year where they beat them. They put a really big emphasis on that. So look, that to me, I'm certainly not the sort of team that I'd write off at any stretch, but I think there's a blueprint there, and I actually think that they're a team that would be well served in a way. I know this sounds a little bit silly, but they'd be a team well served if they get a final outside of Adelaide, and if they get a final at the MCG where a little bit of that pressure's off, and that they can, and if Rankin, they're a different team when Rankin's fit. And he clearly wasn't on Saturday. If they can get that, they can still do some damage because they're too good a team to be not winning finals. I just don't see them as a double chance preliminary final team.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try that without saying, yeah, I think next week, listeners. There's this thing about the Crows that sometimes I think they're less than the sum of their parts. And I think that's because the sum of their parts are a bit weird, just like Port. And I think Matteo mentioned that, I mean, under Hinkley, they never really resolved the issue of being able to play their best four midfielders, any three of them at one time. Like, they could never play all of Wines, Horne-Francis, Rosie, or Butters at once, just from a defensive stability standpoint in the middle. So they'd have to shoehorn them around or work rotations around. And that's not abnormal. And having Rosie out this year provides a neater fit. I think similarly, you'd want Rankine and Dawson. You'd want Berry. Berry's getting a lot of time this year. You'd want, even going down to Rochelle, right? You'd want them towards the action as much as possible. But you just don't have enough balance there. You don't have enough two-way balance. And you've got a game plan that's geared towards, transitioning the ball up the ground to scoring. That they're better at scoring from D half than front half, generally, just like from a looks point of view, because they can do it via the air. It just feels like they haven't found the right mode, and Nix has vacillated between being an intensely back half aggressive team to being a bit more conservative. They haven't found a stable mode or method. And we're into year 6, 7 of the Nix experiment, Matteo?
Yeah, year 7.
Yeah, you should have seen Mateo's look there on his eyes. It was just like 1,000 yards.
It wasn't 1,000. Well, it was 1,000 yards there only because I was trying to do the calculation in my head of if it's 2026 and a coach started in 2020. Gosh, it would be embarrassing if I got that wrong. But he's about to become Adelaide's longest tenured coach. He's very, very close. And
I just feel, if you had to try to describe Nick's football, I think it's a bit more nebulous than Hinkley. Even Hinkley's changed things. Like, a lot of other coaches have more discernible brands. I think the problem with Nick's is I don't think they've got that one wood yet. And that's my concern. I think they're in the mix to do damage in September because it's all matchup based. And I think if Tilthorpe and Walker and Fogarty are firing, then they can beat anyone. But I just think there's so many variables there, and they're so beatable, particularly around contests, that they need to try to shore that up.
Who was the longest serving coach? Sorry to butt in. Who was the longest serving? Whose record will he break? Is it Craig?
Yes, it is Neil Craig. I'm potentially going out on a limb and embarrassing myself and showing my credentials.
I was just trying to do the maths in my head. Yeah.
No, look, hang on. Let's just do a double check. This is the great thing about this podcast, is because we do so much research. So Neil Craig has coached them in 157 games. Nick's to last week, 144. Gary Ayres was 101. And they're the only three coaches to coach them in more than 100 games. That's home and away games. With finals, it's inflated.
I've got 166 games for Neil Craig, but either way, it's more than Nick's is still on. Yeah, look, sort of very, very quickly, because, I mean, as I feel like I say every week, we run long, and maybe that's a feature rather than a bug here on 110 percenters. I think maybe the most concise way I can describe it is for a side that, for a club that sort of believes it's in the contention window, and that's, what I suppose a minor premiership last year suggests, and what everything the club has publicly signalled about the fact that its draft picks this year are on the table. They're obviously pushing hard for Zach Bailey as a free agent. there are still a lot of really unresolved questions to me about Adelaide. I think some of them are tactical. I differ from you a little bit, Cody. I thought there was a pretty discernible identity and brand last year. It was that post clearance contest winning, but that is so capricious and mercurial because you can have guys become banged up, and that becomes less repeatable and less reliable. Winning Dan Curtin taking contested marks on the wing and kicking it to Riley Thilthorpe, who takes a contested mark. That's not really a repeatable method, right? Definitely not in September. And I think there are still personnel questions. And again, I sort of spend some of my time amongst these sort of hardcore Adelaide supporters, and there are. I guess, concerns about how unclear still the midfield mix looks, and even about whether Adelaide should persist with that 3 tall forward setup, and what it gets them and what it costs them, and I think, look, no side is ever complete, no list is ever complete. There are always questions, but I think there are just a lot of them around Adelaide, and certainly it feels like they loom very large now after a loss like that. It makes top 4 very difficult. On the numbers, they're not really a top 4 side. They're 15th for expected score differential, if you can believe that this season. So maybe they're, I don't know, overperforming what they should be anyway. But it was a little bit of a kind of crash back down to earth for Adelaide, but a really, really excellent result for Port. Bragging rights restored over the old enemy. Well, somewhat, I guess you can call them the old enemy. It's a Showdown 60. They're old enemies by now, aren't they?
You've played someone 60 times, you're an old enemy.
I think it's exactly right. Yep. I think that's just right. Okay, look, that wraps it, I think, for our Showdown /Port /Butters /Crows chat. It was a nebulous subject. It was an interesting game. We're going to come back with more on 110 Percenters.
You're listening to 110 Percenters.
Welcome back to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast with Cody Atkinson, Jonathan Orn and me, Matteo Schlapek-Savillo. On Monday, the ABC's Four Corners program revealed that 33 Australian rules footballers have been diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, much more than the previously known 5 cases among professional players. I think I did a decent job of pronouncing CTE in full there. CTE is a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head injuries such as concussions and subconcussive impacts. It's found primarily in athletes, military personnel, and individuals exposed to repetitive head trauma. The Four Corners episode told the heart-wrenching story of former Norwood and Casey Demons player Nick Loudon, who was diagnosed with CTE after taking his own life at the age of only 23. Nick's parents believe that a severe concussion, which he suffered in the final quarter of a game in 2017, permanently impacted his mental health, and that story is told in, I don't know, really sort of extraordinary detail in one of the ABC pieces accompanying the Four Corners documentary. This is a vast and complex and really sad subject, but we think it's an important one. We don't shy away from the big stories here. We are going to talk about it. Jonathan, perhaps the place to begin, because this just is so big, and I think maybe it's important for us to sort of understand our own feelings about this. As people who love and write about and work in the game, what is the impact of a story like that Four Corners one?
I think this story hits differently to other stories of this nature and on this topic. Personally, anyway, the impact of a story like that is it sort of makes you question everything about the sport. We spend so much time really talking and arguing and getting all hot under the collar about stuff in footy that really doesn't matter. But this matters, and not just on a human level either. And that story was just a tragic human story to listen to Nick's parents, even the story with Matty Robbins later on in that Four Corners piece. So it's not just a human story. It is it is about the existential threat to the game. And we've often heard phrasing like that. And I don't think that's an exaggeration when it comes to this story. I mean, we're no longer, when it comes to concussion and CTE, we're not talking about 60-year-olds who are showing signs of dementia anymore. We're talking about kids. And Nick Loudon was a kid. He was 23 years old when he died. And it was a reminder of watching that story last night. It reminded me a lot of the Victorian coroner's report into the death of Shane Tuck, which was just a harrowing read. It was meticulously laid out in this document. Harrowing thing to read. That really familiar from parents, from wives, from loved ones, that sense of helplessness and bewilderment of what's actually happening here. What's happening to this young man that we love, and what can we do? There's that help, and in both cases, in all these cases, you get a sense of like these are athletes who are used to pushing their way through things, who are used to fighting, who are used to finding a solution. And with both Shane Tuck and Nick Loudon, that came through in the coroner's report with Tuck, and in the diaries of Nick Loudon, which his mum and dad read out on the Four Corners show, is that they're constantly questioning, how do I beat this? What is actually happening to me? And there's this sort of bewilderment on all fronts. And eventually they withdraw. And eventually, in that case, they died. And it's devastating. I mean, I thought it was a really, really well done story by Jess and by Four Corners, and I think it's the sort of story I think in the football industry that we're still shirking and not talking about it probably the way that it should be talked about.
Well, yeah, and I don't bring this up to sort of implicitly give ourselves a pat on the back, but it does feel like a story that's quite conspicuous by its absence on the footy programs, right? That would rather talk about other, I guess, more fun or more kind of engrossing stories, perhaps.
I think possibly, and I'm always wary of commenting on what other media organisations are doing, because other media organisations have done some fantastic work on this front. I think of someone like Jay Clark at the Herald Sun, who has covered this issue exhaustively, and other outlets have done so as well, including the Guardian, who we've done some incredible work on the guidelines around concussion and so forth. I just think that, like you mentioned earlier, that this story hit differently, and I think that we are in new territory here when we're talking about a 23-year-old, and when we're talking about a specific incident starting in an under-18s feeder competition. I think that's really disturbing.
Cody, I believe you wanted to talk about the potential correlation between CTE, between instances of CTE, and the way that the game of footy has changed.
Yeah, and I think this is the important thing, because it's becoming highlighted at the top level, but it's not just happening at the highest level. Like Shane Tuck was a lot of Australians' first peek into CTE and professional elite sport. But that's not the case. So every week it feels like I do this, and then Matteo and Jonathan laugh at me, but I'll do this really quickly. Footy didn't start as a fast-paced aerial fight. It didn't start with much contact either. Tackling really didn't exist until the 60s in the form that we know it, maybe the 70s, right? Footy used to have occasional big hits, but they were occasional. It was man-on-man marking. You didn't really leave your man. It was relatively a low-contact game played at relatively low speeds. Now, what's happened over time is people have taken football more seriously. Nutrition has improved. Australians have gotten bigger, taller, and faster. And the game has become professional. The people who have been in charge of the game, have stewarded the games, have wanted to draw more eyeballs in order to ensure the survival of the game at the highest level. And that provides money to the grassroots as well. So we've had things like the electrifying 80s. That was the series, wasn't it? The big hits, the chase down tackles, right? That's what I grew up on too. That, again, didn't exist really back in the day. 1996 is a huge turning point. That's when prior opportunity changed. Prior opportunity used to be you get tackled, you have to dispose of the ball or drop it. For most of the game's history, it was to drop the ball. If you're tackled, you drop the ball. If you don't drop the ball, it's a free kick against you. That changes in 1996 on the urging of coaches to reward the tackler and to make the game more exciting. So we've started seeing these chase down tackles or tackles that hit the dirt. You get an opportunity to fight through a tackle more and more now. The whistle used to be super quick. Heads hitting the ground is bad. Now, it's not even that. It incentivizes tackling, right? The research indicates from the US, from helmet sensors and the like, that for every concussion, you're likely to suffer 10 hits to the head that are as severe or more severe than the concussion itself. So I don't know about you, Jonathan or Mateo, but I used to keep a count of how many concussions I've had, and I'm sort of 3 and 7 depending on how you count. Jonathan, did you do that, or?
I should have. I think it's funny, and I think we were talking about this off air a few weeks ago, but a friend of mine played football, AFL football in the 90s, and we just caught up and he's down from Brisbane the other week, and we just caught up, and we'd never really talked about head knocks because we didn't used to, like, it wasn't a thing to talk about until about 5 or 10 years ago. And I for the first time, we actually had a proper discussion about some of the knocks he took. And he just casually mentioned that one day that Byron Pickett got him in a reserves game. And I was just...
Wow.
And I was terrified to hear things like that. And but just to sort of, I got off topic there, so apologies. But what you were saying there is really interesting about how this isn't just an issue at the top tier. And that's what the Four Corners episode has shone a light on, is that Nick Loudon, now he wasn't playing park footy by any stretch. He was in a really strong under 18 competition, and he was in the Sandford, which is really, really good footy.
He won a Sandford premiership with Norwood.
Yeah, so he's obviously clearly playing a very high standard, fast, strong, big bodies, and so on. The way that this issue is being played out, and probably something that's not spoken enough, is the way this issue is going to play out at the grassroots level. And it was something, it brought to mind an article the former age writer Peter Hanlon wrote last year. I think he wrote it about the 40th anniversary of an infamous country game between Colac and South Warrnambool. And it was a fantastic piece that Pete wrote. He's so good at those sort of pieces, interviewing all the people involved in this game. It was a game he described as outrageously violent. And it was just carnage. And he interviewed a lot of wives and men who are now in their 60s who are suddenly asking these really, really hard questions. What is wrong with me? And what has happened to my brain? And these are the same questions that Nick Loudon was asking his family. It sounds very familiar. And I guess the point I'm getting at is that so often in footy now, it's framed around the top level. And I think that this issue with CTE, and like you say, they don't have to be big concussed. The CTE is very different from concussion. It's an accumulation of knocks. And I think that we're going to start hearing a lot more about, these knocks that these young men and women are taking in suburban and country footy, which don't have the resources to properly look after them, or to umpire them, or to penalise the big hits. I think that was something that was really interesting about this particular story.
Yeah, and I was just, before you take over, Mateo, it's not just CTE, it's other neurodegenerative illnesses as well. And I'm not going to mention them, but there's a lot of them have taken a lot of precedence recently, and there are strong correlative links between any TBIs, either concussive or subconcussive, and the development of these things. My grandfather passed last year, unfortunately, and he played elite footy, and he died with dementia. And the number of I understand he was far from the only one of his teammates to do so. Wow. A lot of these happen in silence, right? And there are links between, I'm not going to say this out loud because there's decency at a certain time, but there are other neurodegenerative diseases that have had links tied to them, to traumatic brain injuries. And I just think the game doesn't prioritize it. We only look for one type of thing, and that's the concussive impact and the hard hit. Sorry, Mateo, I'll let you go.
Thanks, Cody. Look, I want to, before we move on to maybe the AFL's response to this Four Corners investigation, it was, a really excellent piece of journalism. You're absolutely right to acknowledge that, Jonathan. It's focus on sort of players at that, below the elite level, sort of maybe more at that grassroots level, and the costs that they're incurring as well just feels so spot on and so relevant as well. A year ago for my newsletter, I wrote a piece in the aftermath of Jeremy McGovern's enforced, sort of medically enforced retirement, and of course, this Four Corners investigation comes, I suppose, in the aftermath of another West Coast key defender whose career is really in the balance, and that's Harry Edwards, who's been essentially sort of put on a bespoke treatment plan, I believe now, that will effectively rule him out for the rest of the season, but possibly not his career. And we obviously send our best to Harry. And I also want to say, of course, Chelsea Randall, a hero of the first era of Adelaide's AFLW side, and indeed of women's footy in general, announced her retirement yesterday. And I really want to quote from an interview that she gave to the Adelaide Football Club website, because it just feels absolutely impossible to disentangle from this conversation that we're having, and it's about Nick, and it's about Harry, and it's about Chelsea, and it's about Paul Seedsman, and it's about Brayshaw, it's about all
Heather
of these
Anderson.
players. Heather Anderson, yes, thank you, Cody. So this is Chelsea Randall speaking to the Adelaide Football Club website. A few weeks ago, I joined in a tackle drill at training and experienced some starry vision after a couple of minor bumps. And then shortly after that, I had another incident involving mild contact and more starry vision. It was at that point that it became clear that my brain and body could no longer withstand minor bumps without experiencing issues related to concussion. Now, Chelsea Randall, she has a partner, she has a child, she was playing, of course, at the elite level of women's footy, but the remuneration that women's footy players get in Australia is very different to the men's players, and so therefore it makes that cost benefit calculation very different in a way that it is for Ammo's football. Obviously, sorry, not quite, but you know what I mean. It does mean that AFL players, for men and women, they have access now to a $54 million injury and support fund, which includes a severe injury benefit, which can compensate players whose careers are ended or severely impacted by things like concussion or cognitive impairment. But someone who, almost in a Nick Loudon type situation suffers a terrible concussion when they're playing, junior footy, Ammo's footy on the weekend, they're impaired for life. And what's the best they can do? Maybe file a work, they can't even file a work cover claim, really.
And that's what's so interesting about this, and what's so terrifying about it. And it had a bit to do with Laura Kane's role last night on the Four Corners show, is that at what point is the AFL responsible for this? Is the AFL responsible for educating every parent of a 12-year-old who's starting to play football? Is the AFL responsible for what happened in a country football game 40 years ago? It's these questions are just impossible to answer, and you feel like that they're questions that are really going to only be answered in courtrooms going forward, because we're going to see a lot of this play out in court in the next few years. And it's just tragic on so many levels.
Can I have another tangent, guys?
Please.
Of course you can, Cody.
I don't know how many of you guys are fans of American football. I know some of our listeners are. Do you guys know the story of how Teddy Roosevelt saved American football?
I know the story. He once, I know he made a speech when he had a bullet lodged in his brain once. I think I learnt that off The Sopranos. I think Junior Soprano mentioned that on The Sopranos. Please carry on though.
So 1905, there was 18 deaths in American football. There was significant severe injuries. There was sepsis, and players were just dying, and mostly young college men dying, and it was a national crisis. So Teddy Roosevelt got a group of people together to make the game viable and safer. He decided that was enough. The calls were to ban the sport. He introduced the forward pass, which you think of American football now. It was existent for 40 years without the forward pass. Teddy Roosevelt invented the forward pass and made the game safer. And it's gone in those times between more safe and less safe. The Guardian cap helmets, the rules on hits and traumas and all that. I don't think we've had a similar reckoning in Australia with Australian football. Rugby has done a lot of work recently, including using mouth guards as sensors to measure traumas, to lowering. Now high contact in rugby union is above the belly button, I think. Anything above the belly button or above the sternum or something like that. There's a lot that are being done in other sports. I'm not seeing the same sort of motion in Australian football. Like the arm chop freeze. You used to get an arm chop free at the drop of a hat. Now you have to basically kill a guy to get an arm chop free. And you think about what's where your mark is. It's the back of the head. I don't know. Sorry for the sidebar, guys.
No, not at all. It's all relevant, Cody. It should be said that Tom Morris did report this week on, is it called the Agenda Setters? I think that apparently the AFL last week, maybe after it finished explaining to club CEOs what the fixture might look like after Tassie comes in, it also said that the AFL is going to bring in limits for contact training. And I feel like maybe it's time to sort of, tackle this kind of existential question. When we're off mic still, Jonathan, I was kind of talking about how, I don't know, this sort of reminds me of like as though this is a big asteroid hurtling towards Earth and we're the dinosaurs or something. It does actually feel existential, although I'm not sure it's being treated as such by again, many sort of people in the footy industry when maybe it should be. Again, it was Jess Halloran, whose work has to be commended in the highest terms on this. She wrote in late March that an AFL concussion class action, which has former Geelong player, as you'd know very well, Jonathan Horn, Max Rook, as the lead plaintiff, that has been expanded now to more than 100 players, 11 clubs. Victorian Supreme Court Justice Andrew Keogh suggested that May 31st could be a possible trial date. So that looms as, I think, a really significant day for, I don't think it would be too much of an exaggeration to say the future of footy, really.
Absolutely. And I think that after a story like that, and it's not hyperbole to say this, but I think that there'd be a lot of parents of boys and girls thinking, do I want my kids playing this sport?
Yeah.
And it was interesting that one of the CTE experts on Four Corners last night, I forget her name, she was a professor from Boston University. She said that we should be banning tackling in contact sports until the person is of the age of consent. So that we should be banning all tackling until the age of 18. Now, my immediate reaction to that is to go all old school and say, you've got to be kidding me. But I think that we're going to be having these conversations more and more. And it goes to the core of what this sport is. And it also goes to the core of the AFL's commercial imperatives, which is to play more games, which is to not make the game shorter, is to sort of keep that gladiatorial aspect as much as they can. All of that flies in the face of a lot of the recommendations that we're hearing from neurosurgeons and so on.
Well, yeah, in the United Kingdom, I think at many sort of underage levels of junior soccer, heading is now banned. You can't head the ball, which obviously will sort of shape the entire developmental trajectory of an entire generation of kids who grow up, maybe aspiring to become professionals, not really having learned how to head a ball. And it makes me think that if it's sort of possible to capture in a single sentence or a single question the sort of essence of this, and I think the stakes and frankly, what I think the AFL should be thinking and talking very, very hard, if there's anything they can really do, which is it possible to reform the sport to ameliorate concussion risk while maintaining its fundamental character? Because that fundamental character is the game that the three of us and all of our listeners have fallen in love with. But the cost of this game are so high and they are impossible to ignore. And they are tragic. And it was tragic when it was Danny Frawley. It was tragic when it was Shane Tuck. But, now it's Nick Loudon. And now it's Heather Anderson and Paul Seedsman and Chelsea Randall right? These are sort of not players who existed in a sort of, I don't know, like a pre-high definition era. These are players we remember who played for our footy teams, won flags for our footy teams, are getting really, really sick, and they're going to be sick for the rest of their lives.
I think on that note, the game can be reformed. The game has evolved so incredibly dramatically over the course of its history that I don't think there's many characteristics that can't be modified or changed. They'll be out raw. But you're right, don't we owe it to our young men and women to try to do something to fix this problem, especially now that we know about it? Don't we sort of owe it to at least try to give a voice that there is potential solutions? I don't know.
Look, I don't know. I feel like we could talk about this for an hour or 10 hours and we'll make just as little progress toward a solution. But maybe a final question for the two of you, because I don't know, maybe I need some sort of consolation from this. It is a hard subject. Is there anything we as fans can do? Is there anything that we can advocate for to make this game a little bit safer for the people who play it?
I think both as fans and even as people who work in the industry, but even if you're a person on Twitter who likes to voice your opinion on the game, I think that we need to, for a start, stop throwing hissy fits whenever someone's suspended for knocking someone unconscious. I think that's a really good start. It'd be really good if a former legend of the game, when someone has their head pile drived into the ground and gets 3 weeks, and the former legend saying the game's gone soft, let's hark back to the 80s or 90s. It'd be really, really good if we stopped talking like that and accept that we're entitled to be cynical about so much that the AFL does, but this is actually one area where they are showing a duty of care. And I think that's a really, really good place to start. I actually agree with Cody in that players will adapt and that the game at the highest level will change and that we can all adapt with that. What I worry about is the way that the game's played elsewhere, out in country towns, out in junior football, 15, 16-year-olds who play a very sort of reckless brand of football where that's what I worry about is the impact that we're going to be seeing from that level of football.
Yeah, I'll echo that, Jonathan. That's my concern too, because I certainly know when you've got a lot of testosterone and hopes and dreams flying around, your body comes second, and yet I'm going to count the head as part of the body there. I genuinely think that all contact sports in Australia, especially like football, rugby league, rugby union, need to sort of have nearly a group reckoning about what a future looks like together. There's often this competition between the sports in Australia, but they're really not in competition with each other for this type of thing. And what safe sport looks like going forward, consensual safe sport, especially for junior athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sorry to butt in there. That's incredibly rude of me. But just one more thing to that. And this reminded me a little bit of Laura Kane's role last night on Four Corners, is the AFL have to talk to their people, the people who love this game. They have to talk to them like they're humans, like they're adults, like that they're not just and I know that the AFL are bound legally on this, but they have to have a proper conversation with the people about what's happening here. They have to use real language, real words, because this is serious, and the kind of language they've been using over the years is not enough, and we need to know more, and we need to hear more from them.
Yeah, I think absolutely agree with all your points. Sorry, I might throw to Matteo because I sense that he's about to do his transition part.
That's right. I'm gonna try and wrap it there. Thanks to the both of you. I hope we did this really difficult subject some justice. We're going to be right back.
You're listening to the 110 Percenters.
Welcome back to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. It's time for From the Hip, our rapid fire question segment.
From the Hip.
One host asks, two hosts answer. Jonathan, the first question is yours.
Cody, friend of the podcast, Tom Morris, recently said that expert analysts openly barracking for a team is the future of footy commentary. What is your take on Tom's take?
I grew up with you never cheer in the press box or the commentary suite. I don't know, maybe it's a bit naive or idealistic, but I think once you get rooting interest into it, the analysis part of the expert analysis sort of disappears and you start to see the game with a lens. And that's not to say that there's not a place, in my view, for broadcasts oriented towards the fans. I really like American sport where there's a home team broadcast in a lot of areas and a lot of broadcast markets, but there's still a national game broadcast that tries to view the game pretty impartially. It would be a shame, and I think it would be a big ethical departure to remove that, especially as a record of the game, a historical record of the game not being impartial. But I just don't think we should let our standards slip. I think it's really, really poor. Matteo?
Cody, I also like some American sports, so I understand exactly what you meant when you said rooting interests. I do want to state for the record that maybe in the Australian vernacular, rooting interest perhaps has a slightly different meaning. But I know what you said, and I agree. And let me add another cent on top of the cent I've already contributed to this, which is to say that I'm in favour of whatever outcome that makes me getting an AFL commentary berth a little bit more likely. I've gotten a lot of positive reinforcement about my voice since we've started the pod, and
it's very smooth.
You're not calling Jonathan Jono, mate. You're not going Cody. Here you go, Cody.
Maybe I do need to become more rocker. Yeah, maybe it would need to be a sort of like a South Australian narrowcast or something, because I've got a little bit of that affectation. Maybe I'm not ready for the national market just yet, but you know what, broadcasters? Come on, take a punt. I'm right here. Cody, the next question is yours.
Matteo, a delegation of players met with the AFL on Monday to offer feedback on 3 rules: the stand rule, the new ruck rules, and the last disposal rule. What rule would you like to politely discuss with Swanee?
I think Swanee and I probably have a very convivial chat. I reckon I can when I have to, I can sort of code switch and play a bit of the ochre in me. I once remember at a Christmas talking to it was an ex's father who was a mechanic, and I am not a very kind of automotively inclined person. I don't drive. I don't have a driver's license, but I was able to honestly pass myself off as quite a good, as having quite a lot of car knowledge based entirely on my recollection of having played the Gran Turismo games on PlayStation as a child. So there you go. I reckon Swanee and I would get on just great. The serious answer to your question, Cody, the semi-serious answer to your question, I think if a ball goes through the goals but grazes the post, it should be a goal. Like that is maybe it's a small item to have number one on the top of the list, but this is where I actually become a sort of Waitley-esque arc, like an arc abolitionist or something. Fine, if it's touched, no, Jonathan, no, you'll get to respond. But for now, no. If it goes through the posts, it should be, assuming it hasn't been touched, it should be a goal.
Ole.
And that's right. That's whether it's soccer, whether it's American football, whether it's league, any other sport, you name it, except for our strange mutant, native game. That's my piece, Jonathan. You can respond now if you wish.
No, I like it. I like it a lot. I'm just, you brought up Waitley and the arc. I'm worried about Jared and this arc at the moment. It's driving him insane. I just think the next incident is just going to. The man's just. I'm just worried at the moment with Jared. When it comes to Swanee, Swanee's a ripper, by the way. We've always got to preface any comment about Swanee by saying that Swanee's a ripper, and that Swanee understands common sense.
He does, thankfully.
Have you heard that mentioned at all? It seems to be.
He's one of us.
When you get your media accreditation, to just remind your viewers and readers of that.
Swanee, I need to include that in my application next year.
Swanee, with all your common sense, mate, you need to fix the holding the ball rule, please. Please spend the summer get on it, simplify it, and most of all, explain it. Get it done, Swanee.
Are you saying we
Yeah,
should be
good.
rewarding the tackler, Jonathan?
I just want a coherent rule that we all understand, and that I mean, we could do an entire segment on what path we go down in terms of the rewarding the tackler or where we go with that. But it is a mess, and common sense Swanee is the man to fix it.
Can I just hop in there and offer my suggestion?
Yes.
I used to have a joking one about removing the bounce. I don't believe that anymore. I think our last segment, to be honest, is what I'd be talking to Swanee about, and making sure we make the game safer. And I think that is, Jonathan, your point is we need to clean up the holding the ball rule and reduce the likelihood of contact and de-incentivize the tackle. So I would allow incorrect disposal when a tackle, get rid of it. As long as you get the ball out, and if you bring an opponent to ground, even remotely head first, free kick against, 50 against, whatever.
I agree. Swanee's a ripper, so he'll make it happen. Don't worry.
He's a ripper. And we're not talking about Jimmy Barnes' brother, Swanee.
Cody, that was a disappointingly profound and sensible answer. I sort of gave the joke answer, and now I just look like I'm not very serious, but that was very good. The final question on this week's From the Hip is mine, and it's to Jonathan, and it comes from a listener, Derek Smith. Thank you very much, Derek. Listeners, do submit your questions whenever you feel like it. Jonathan, in light of Ben Stokes' retirement, who are some players that have overall middling records but have seemingly scarred some fan bases for life after a few big game performances? Maybe a certain unlikely bulky hero?
Yes, actually, I hadn't thought of him. I'm mentally scarred by that game more than any other game ever played. Thank you, Derek. Good question. How well is English cricket going, by the way? Thank you for that. Ben
Separate
Stokes.
podcast, yep.
Yes, God, how long have you got? There's a great website out there from Demon Blog. Adam, I forget Adam's surname, but he writes about.
That's a good book too. His book's good.
It is. So shout out to Adam, but he often writes about being Kent Kingsley. About how Kent Kingsley would always just completely out of nowhere come up and just destroy these Melbourne teams over the years. And actually sort of on that note, my brother's a very keen Collingwood supporter, and he always had a theory, always had this thing about Aaron Davey, that every year that Aaron Davey, there was a period in, early 2000s, I guess it would be, where he would just torch Collingwood every time and then not do too much apart from that. I think the obvious one, the standout one that you guys would probably do would be Big Coxie in the 2018 prelim. Jordan De Goey was best on ground that night, but it's remembered as the Mason Cox night, and he took a baseball bat to one of the great back lines, and just one of the most amazing half hours of footy I think I've ever seen.
I was going to go Kent Kingsley. Like that's a huge shame. I think there's certain fan bases that are scarred by the name Ben Ronk without realizing he had precisely like 3 good games before being like he was a good player. He had 3 big games though. Kingsley's an interesting one. You don't think about that name too much.
Maybe every month or so, I think about that Angus Monfries bounce in the Showdown. Not a bad little player, Angus Monfries, but that one sticks in the craw a bit. Also, I guess Stephen Motlop, given the Showdown flavour of today's show, Stephen Motlop. I guess Braden Cook sort of offset that a little bit, but that was a good one.
On the Adelaide theme, I reckon there's a few St Kilda supporters out there still cursing the name Shane Allen.
Yep,
and
I reckon they would be.
Here's another one. Who took that?
Yeah,
we've forgotten.
That was just the most absurd quarter of football ever played. That quarter, Bomber Thompson, what were you doing, mate? You got to make some moves. I still haven't gotten over that game.
Look, I did mention you. I did mention you. I didn't give him his name, but I gave him his sort of commentary name as.
Sorry, I didn't give you due process.
Yeah. Very good.
But in due course, I'll give you some recognition. Yeah.
Before this gets too off the rails and before it becomes another installment of Remembering Some Guys, the podcast, I think we should probably wrap it up there. Look, very, very quickly, guys, before I do the outro bit, any pieces you want to plug or whether it's your own or anyone else's?
Yeah, just basically we'll be doing like a follow up to that that conversation we had before about CTE, sort of touching on some of the issues that we sort of but it's the sort of thing that if you cover it or write about it, you're only really scratching the surface. So yeah, we'll be doing something on that this week.
I'm sure it'll be the most eloquent and deeply felt piece of writing on it. But again, huge credit to the ABC team for their work on this subject. Cody,
I'm so behind on writing. I'm still working on the piece that I was working on 3 weeks ago. Turns out when you're awake at 3 a.m., sometimes you need to sleep instead. So sorry for anyone who actually reads what I do. I recommend that you read everything that Mateo and Jonathan are doing because they're putting out some really great stuff. I think if you want to read outside of that, read about Teddy Roosevelt and how he saved American football. There's a lot of good sports stuff that's outside of the remit.
It's funny. I forget who it was, but one of those News Corp columnists wrote an article a couple of months ago. It might have been like Caleb Bond or someone like that about how we need more Teddy Roosevelts in our life. I thought,
jeez,
thanks for that, guys. That's the hard men of News Corp sort of harking back to the 1900s. It's great.
Expect pieces about Teddy Roosevelt. Expect pieces about medieval soccer or historical Florentine soccer in the show notes this week. That is all we have time for, unfortunately. As you can probably tell, we've had a blast, but we do have to, wrap it up for the week. My thanks to Jonathan and Cody, and a hearty thanks to you, listener. If you like what you're hearing, please review 110 Percenters on your podcast platform of choice. It makes our show easier to find. And even if you're not loving it, we want to hear it. You can write to me at hello@1percenters.net.au. You can now find us, of course, on Twitter and Instagram, 110 Percenters. Until next week, I've been Mateo.
I've been Jonathan.
And I've been Cody.
And we're the 110 Percenters.